Hi, Alchemists, and welcome back to another episode of Elemental Educator. I'm your host, Tyler. If you are joining us for the first time, thank you so very much for tuning in, and welcome to a place where we redefine leadership and challenge the status quo. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to Elemental Educator on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast from, and check out our website, elementaleducator.com. There you'll find this podcast, blog posts, discussion forums, and a contact link to join us for an episode as a guest, and our Elemental Educator workshop that offers insightful, empowering, and highly engaging professional development. Today, we're joined by Dean Shareski, a dynamic educator and consultant known for his work in fostering joy and community in education. Dean's journey from classroom teaching to educational consulting is a testament to his commitment to making learning a joyful and meaningful experience. I can't wait to dive into this episode with Dean where we unpack community and education. So get ready to let the alchemy of education ignite your passion for learning.
This is the Elemental Educator, the podcast where we kindle the fires of dialogue with the alchemists of education. We're here to embark on a journey where ancient wisdom meets the contemporary world of education. On Elemental Educator, we dive into the deep waters of adaptability, feel the grounding earth of core values, ride the swift winds of change, and ignite the fiery spirit of risk-taking. Fire, earth, wind, water. This is the Elemental Educator. And now your host, Tyler Como.
All right, Alchemists. Today, we're joined by the only man who believes that sharing is caring isn't just a preschool mantra, but a way of life. He's part educator, part digital guru, part author, and a full-time Twitter legend. He's here to educate us, probably enlighten us, and if we're lucky, he might share his secret recipe for the world's best tweet. Dean, thank you so much for joining me today on the Elemental Educator.
Well, thank you, Tyler, for having me. That's a pretty big intro. It's not the best intro I've ever had. The best intro I ever had was a high school student in Chicago who was supposed to introduce me for a conference, and she didn't know me from Adam. So she wanted me to feed her some bio information. And I said to her, just make it up. So she did. She said, Dean Shareski is a Grammy award-winning songwriter and singer. He has also won an Oscar and she went on, and the people in the audience who had gone on with her. And then finally at some point, the people started catching on and she said, I just made all that stuff up. So that was the best intro I've had, but that might've been the second best.
So we're halfway there. Hey, Dean, I can't thank you enough for joining me on this episode.
Oh, thank you. Hey, always great to add to my network of people.
What do you do right now, Dean? And how did you get to doing what you do?
Right now, I always identify as a teacher. I always will. That was where it all started. But right now, and for the past 12 years after I left public education, I have been in a couple different roles, but currently in a role where I'm consulting and supporting professional learning across North America in a lot of different capacities. So I work for a company called Advanced Learning Partnerships, and we do a variety of professional learning, everything from esports and AI to wellness to strategic planning to leadership consulting to coaching academies, you name it, we probably do it. We have a team of about 70 different consultants who specialize in a lot of these different areas. And then a lot of us have a wider range of that. So I am the one that kind of manages and looks after all of those activities in Canada, as well as doing some of the actual consulting and work across Canada and in the US itself.
Wow. We'll definitely be in touch soon because we're actually starting esport at my school. We just purchased 10 gaming computers to get into it, and we'll see where it goes. It's going to be powerful. It's going to be a lot of fun.
You're in Alberta?
And yeah, I'm in Alberta. Yeah. So we've been talking a little bit with some, I guess, people around us that are setting up their own programs, seeing what they want to do, and we'll hit the ground running with that for sure.
Yeah, and not in that particular area. We've got somebody that's basically builds everything from the ground up. And I think what I appreciate most about our approach is it's not, our focus isn't just let's get esports going so you can run in competitions. Really, we tie that esports to your district's strategic planning and find out like the fact that, the benefit of this, and you probably know this, is it goes far beyond the gaming component. It's about community building. It's about finding
Absolutely.
places of belonging for kids that might not find that belonging in other places in school. And so it really does speak to, if you've got those kinds of goals as part of your school and district plans, we want to make sure that the way you set that up is done so that the most number of kids can be involved. So this isn't something where we're just picking the
Right.
top gamers
Yeah.
to win competitions. That can be
Exactly.
part of it, but that's not really the benefit that it brings to a school. So yeah, great to have that
Yeah,
conversation.
it's for everyone, and it really helps. Like small rural schools really need to get in on this, because there's 1-player games, 2-player games, 3, 4, 5. You don't need any set number to make your team. It can be anyone
That's
that
right.
wants to come and do it. And as soon as there's so many avenues, you can get onto the scholarship stream,
That's
and how
right.
many of
Yeah,
those in
yeah.
the States exist. It's huge.
And then all of the offshoot industries that come out of that. So whether you're a gamer or you're a
Gosh.
filmer or you're
A
marketing,
developer.
yeah, there's so many
it's all
places.
there.
We actually start in
Yeah.
some cases, like we're working with a district in Ontario right now that Ontario is pretty locked down as far as the types of software and game that they can use. So we're starting with Minecraft. Let's just start there and use that as a launching pad. The other thing that we do as well is another initiative called Girls Who Game. So it's really targeting young girls who, again, esports can be intimidating and it can be a pretty male dominated field. And so how do you help young girls break that barrier and feel comfortable in that space so that they can have access to some of the opportunities you mentioned as well? So that's
And it doesn't have to be male focused. It can be many, right? It could be
absolutely, yeah.
anybody that knows how to handle a device. I want to jump back though, Dean. I want to unpack, to start with, you call yourself an educator, a teacher, and one of the first things that I like to unpack in our elements is our earth and our core values and why we do things.
Yeah.
And so what brought you to education in the first place?
To be honest, there was a couple of things that got me here. When I went to university, I was studying to be a journalist, and that was going to be where I wanted to go. And interestingly enough, I've written a book, and I still write, so it's not completely far away from what I do. But that didn't turn out to be obviously my career path. And I also discovered, I knew it intuitively, but it became, maybe I had some opportunities to work with younger kids in a couple different capacities. I realized just how much I loved hanging out with like little ones and young kids. And so I actually, my career started with grade 1. I taught first grade for 7 years when I first started. Just really liked that age group, had a lot of fun with them. And I still just get a blast out of hanging around with those kids and just seeing that developmental stage of life. So it was really that love of kids, and I think when you talk about this sort of earth core values, I was blessed probably about, I think it goes back 13 years ago. This was when I was still in the local school district, got to go on an adventure, if you will. It was a unique professional learning opportunity called Unplugged, where there were 38 different educators from across Canada who were, ironically, some of the most plugged in technology focused people across Canada, but came together for a weekend without technology to write a manifesto on why education matters. And that's where I began to do a lot more reflecting around what matters to me. And what it ultimately came down to was joy. That's what matters. Like, I want people to find joy in what they do. And I always knew that I didn't have a passion for curriculum. Like, it's part of what we do for sure. I get it. But it wasn't like, oh, I love math or I love science or even writing, which I do, but it wasn't about that. It was about the fact that you're spending 5 or 6 hours a day with 25 or 30 other human beings. How do you ensure that that time you spend together is a joyful one, where it's just like a blast to be together? And listen, I am under no illusion that's difficult to do day in and day out. It just is. But for the most part, that's what I wanted it to be. Like, kids just had a great day. Like, you just had a great day at school. It could be hard. It could be challenging. It could be silly. It could be whatever. But at the end of the day, yeah, that was a good day. We had a good day. And so that.
And if you haven't read Embracing a Culture of Joy, You have to. It's a really good read. It really highlights why that should be a value with you. I want to go a little bit further. I'm going to poke you a little bit here because your earth is rooted in something really strong, which is that culture around us. Why take that to education though, when you could take it to any other industry?
Interestingly enough, I do look at other industries, and I think it's sometimes easier to find it in certain fields for sure. I would say the reason why it's so important is because it felt like, I think a lot of teachers experience this, that a lot that as they have this enthusiasm for the job when they get in, you're excited, you've got all these plans around how you want your classroom to be, and there's a lot of just momentum that comes at those in those early years, and then you find out that like there's a lot of bureaucracy in this job. There's a lot of things that I didn't really count on that, and it's hard, and there's just demands, and so I saw too many people losing that joy and forgetting that that's why we do it. And again, I don't Pollyanna this. I don't say, oh, this is just easy, just flip a switch. I think it's difficult work and challenging to make it joyful. But I felt that at the end of the day, we needed this more than ever. Like we're working with children. And the other thing that's emerged, particularly in the last few years after, even since I wrote that book just after I had my first granddaughter. So it was about 7. She's 6 now. I have 2 more now. And I think the other thing that I've come to know and advocate for is that childhood is very precious and it's very sacred. And the world we live in wants to take childhood away in so many ways. And we do things to try to take the joy out of being a kid, right? Like the demands on kids today and the pressures that they feel. And sometimes it's just, I have a real problem sometimes with the way we talk about, oh, kids can change the world. And yeah, they can. And there's a lot of kids that are doing things. But at the same time, is that what we want them to do? Can't they just be kids? Like you only get to be 7 once. That's it. Done. You only get to be 13 once. And kids are naturally have a tendency to try to be adults too, right? There's the kid that's 12 going on 20. And so we know, and we all experience that we want to hurry up and become adults. That's part of, but I feel like as parents, as grandparents, as teachers, we should be working to slow that down and saying, you'll get there soon enough, kid. Like you'll be an adult and you'll have all these things that you think are so awesome and you'll realize a lot of stuff. So how do we help you just enjoy being a kid and all of the naivety that comes with, and that's the beauty of watching young. That's why I love teaching first grade, is because I was in many cases showing them something they never saw before, right? Introducing them to ideas and experiences that I never knew that before. And just that childlike wonder that is a real thing. And if we do this right, you can still see childlike wonder at the ages of 17 and 18. If we do it right, like we can introduce them to all kinds of things that they go, wow, I didn't know that existed. Isn't that ever cool? And that becomes something that if we're really good at it, we can experience that our whole lives, that sense of awe and wonder with things. It's harder to do because we get jaded. We know a little bit too much sometimes, but
There's a resounding message in my last few podcast episodes I've recorded where we're becoming a ubiquitous agreement that the best minds to teach are the young ones because they haven't been shaped to close their doors yet. And we're meeting so many kids at junior, senior high. We're meeting adults who just have that perspective of, oh, I'm okay closing that door. That's fine. I'm going to move on from it. And the message you're sharing is so powerful. It's about keeping those doors open and being excited about things. And you talk about you're only going to be 7 once, you're only going to be 13 once. This is a message for adults. You're only going to be 30 once.
yeah.
You're only going to be 40 once. What are you doing to make that your best year? What are you doing to bring joy in that year? Because you only get 1 year of it. So powerful. Now, Dean, this segues really nicely to go, you're modest here because you talk about book number 1, but there is book number 2. And book number 2, Different Schools for a Different World, has 6 things for people to take away from it. And I'm hoping you can walk through that a little bit in the implementation process for people listening that are wondering, okay, so what can I do about it?
Yeah, I don't know that I see them as closely lined as you might see them. They are. There's certainly trying to create these spaces for kids to thrive and for teachers to thrive. And this is really I give most of the credit here to my co-writer, Dr. Scott McLeod, who really this is much more kind of his area, but certainly these are what we would call the tenets of trying to create joyful learning environments. We talk about boredom, we talk about innovation and equity and information literacy. All of these components are, I guess the argument is that they help when we do them right. They help create these joyful learning environments. And I think schools have always been behind in general when it comes to relevancy, right? We're a very slow moving train.
We've got some curriculums that are over 30 years old.
Yeah. And just even the structure of why is it that we just decide to group kids the way we group them? And why are the days the way they are? Why is curriculum broken up into these segmented learning times when no learning is? I remember I felt this when I was a young teacher, when I had to fill in a timetable to account for all of the minutes. And I even said at that point, I don't teach that way. When I teach kids, we do science when we're reading, we do math when we're doing social studies. Like we're doing all
It's all cross-curricular.
It was all, I knew
But
that.
how do you justify it on paper, Dean? How do you show the people that you're meeting the
I
expectations?
had principals that were wise enough that said, listen, just fill it in for the paperwork. Keep doing what you're doing. Don't worry about it.
There we
This
go.
is just, and I always appreciated that.
Good leadership.
Don't stress about it. This is just part of the game that you have to play. But then I know there's others that see that as being a big deal. So yeah, no, the more you work in the space, the more you start to see lots of through lines between a lot of the conversations that you can have around changing the way classrooms look and feel. And at the end of the day, I think for me, the joy part is just a simplistic way, a simple way of keeping my focus on that's what matters to me. And
What's the first step there? If I come up and say, I need to bring joy, what's the first step?
I really do think part of it is this embracing the idea of community. And you've got a classroom of whatever you have, 20, 30 kids. And for you not to recognize that we're spending in elementary school or even in high school, you're spending a good portion of your day together. And if it is inconsequential who is sitting around you, then why bother coming to school? Like, just go back to COVID and do it online and don't worry about it, because it doesn't matter who else is in the room. If that's the way you teach, then you're making the statement, it doesn't matter that there's other people. It's just a contract between a teacher and a student as in individuals. Instead of saying, holy crap, we've got 25 kids here. How do we take advantage of being with and learning with and from one another? You have this kind of unfair advantage built in, that you've got all these diverse opinions and thinking. And again, I'm always careful whenever I make a statement that I don't try to sound like it's easy. I'm just saying that's the affordance. That's the benefit you have when the school bus comes every day and drops off a bunch of kids. What are you going to do to take advantage of the fact, oh, okay, we got all these people in a room. What are we going to do? I think we got that a little bit as we returned back to school after COVID. It was like, wow, this feels good just to be in a room with people. Like, that just felt good. It felt right. And I don't think we'd appreciated how much that we missed that. But at the same time, it's great. It is just great to be in a room together, but there's so much more you can do. The first thing is start with the idea of how do we build a community around this? And I also understand it's a pseudo community. Your people are forced to be together. Like, this is not belonging to a club or whatever where you raise your hand and you join it voluntarily. Like, they're forced to be there. Okay, so I recognize that. Not everybody's choosing to be part of this, but how do I make this place valuable to you? And how do I take advantage of the fact that you could learn from one another here? Because there's all kinds of, that's the old adage of the smartest person in the room is the room. I think that's true whether you're talking about kindergarten kids or adults in a room. Like, there's just so much there. And so thinking about structuring your classroom in a way that says this is our classroom. I think there's a fundamental difference, right, between my classroom and our classroom. It's my classroom. I'll make the rules. You just follow along, and that's the way it's going to. If it's our classroom, we got to co-create this together. You still play a significant role, and you're the leader, no doubt, as the teacher, but you need input from everybody to make this place and the time we spend together valuable.
And that's so powerful. And what you're touching on as well is in instilling community, you're getting people to buy into why you're doing it. So you're talking about the uniqueness of each individual. You're talking about the opportunities. You're talking about collective efficacy and a growth mindset and failing forward. All of these really nice things that thrive when people come together and recognize it's a system of people, not people systems, right? So it's really powerful what you're pushing. Now, from the ed consultant side, your current job is to look at what people are trying to do because they've reached out to you and said, how can I do this? Where can we go with it? How can I make it better? How do you deal, or how do you face when you're met with pushback on what you're trying to suggest to people?
Yeah, I think pushback is always good. I'll give you an example. And again, this is a simplistic example, but I think it works. So if you have a high school teacher, for example, then you're saying, hey, you need to involve more of your students in this one. You need to redo the structure of what you're doing so that they have more voice, choice, those kinds of things. And the teacher says, listen, I've been teaching for 20 years and I lecture and I'm a great lecturer and I don't want to change. And which my next question is like, how do you know that? Like, what is your evidence to suggest this is all working? Is it student grades? Is it feedback? What is it? And if you can actually show me the evidence, that would be one thing that say, you know what, maybe there is something to that. Like maybe you are just such an amazing storyteller that you should keep doing that. However, I would say, could you keep doing that and find a way to create community? So I think whenever I get pushback I want to be, first of all, genuinely curious. What do you mean? And I think too, a lot of this stuff too comes down to your philosophy of what is school for. And so sometimes it requires us to pull back from what do you think? Is school about a place where we rank kids and we find out who's the best and who's the worst, and we reward the kids that are the best and we punish kids that are bad? Do you believe that kids are inherently going to try to game the system, right? Like this one's become a really interesting conversation in our work around generative AI, because one of the things that teachers are worried about is kids are going to cheat. They're going to use this and they're going to cheat, which, I mean, number one, the research shows kids aren't cheating any more now than they ever were. So it's not exasperating a problem. Cheating has always existed, to which lends the question, why are kids cheating? Are they cheating because they just see you as you're just in the way of them getting a degree or a diploma at the end or a passing grade? You're just a barrier, and I'm just trying to get over top of a hurdle, which then makes me say, like, how do I make that so this isn't just a hurdle, but this is actually something that kids think is valuable and interesting? And if you can't get to that, and again, I'm not saying that you're never going to have a kid who honestly says, doesn't matter what you do, I just want to get the grade and go on. Listen, I taught the last number of years where I taught higher ed, I had this honest conversation with my students. I said, listen, if you're taking this course because you have to, and you do not want to invest any more than the minimum, I just want to know that. And I want to structure this class so that you don't have to pretend that you love this or are interested in this.
And I'll stop
I'm
harassing you. And
I'm not going to fight you. Let's just be honest with one another. Now, I'm still going to try my very best to help you think this is more valuable than you thought. I might not get there, but I just want to know, okay, that's what you're thinking. So I got to work a little harder. But then I would have other students who said, yeah, at the end of the day, I don't care. I don't care what my grade was. And that's one of the things I write a lot on my blog about self-assessment. I just believe that is such a critical thing. Assess yourself then. So if you cheated, hey, I did great and I cheated. Okay, listen, that's you, man. Listen, it is not my education. It is yours. This is your education. It's not mine. So how do I help you understand that in the best way possible?
And what you're talking to is the idea of empowerment and making students, even adults, and that teacher that's giving pushback, take charge of what they're doing and at least establish a sense of ownership over what they're creating and doing, so that hopefully there also comes a sense of pride. And then with that, a sense of joy and fulfillment of what I'm doing is good, what I'm doing is cool, the work I'm putting in, I'm proud of. And by establishing that empowerment and that ownership, you create those spaces that we're trying to strive to. And again, that needs to be prefaced, and you've been doing a great job of this for me. This is not easy. We can't just flip a switch and that all of a sudden changes, and the next day every single kid has ownership over all their work. Every single teacher in your division has ownership over all of their planning. It's a process and it takes a lot of time, and some people aren't going to get there. We need to have a way to navigate that still. And so how do you take your earth and then bring it to that navigating point where that's not working?
Yeah. And I think I always like starting with a baseline. Like, what is our baseline to establish that? And I don't know that I've ever thought of this before until you actually just said, Tyler, you talked about empowerment. So what if, I'm just thinking out loud here, what if we said, okay, my first goal as a teacher is to identify the kids who feel empowered. And we could probably sit down in a half an hour and crunch out a rubric or just some considerations as to what does that even mean? So if it means, one of the things that I think it has to mean is, would you take this class if you didn't have to? Would you feel that you can get an A in this class or whatever? We'd go through that.
Would you try if your parents weren't making you?
So whatever it is, and that may be a very small number in some cases. And I think we've seen, and I think too, it's interesting when you look at certain disciplines, like whether it's music or art, oftentimes they have a higher level of that. So maybe you teach math and maybe you got 5% of your kids.
Those are typically chunked into the options category though, right? And then so the kids taking
Right.
it one option.
That's right.
And math 30, for example, might be one where you see like that grade 12. It's higher because that's no longer their graduation requirement. That's now something they want for post-secondary.
Sure. And so let's acknowledge that. Let's say, oh, I get it. You got to take this one but listen, if you are teaching that and you don't even believe that it's important, if you just think, I get it, I just teach this one because this is what they need to get into all these programs, and I don't even really think this is valuable, I don't know what to tell you at that point.
You shouldn't be teaching that.
Either you
That's
shouldn't
the
be
answer.
teaching
That's what
it, or you're just going to create a system that just helps plow the kids through and you're just playing the game, which I don't know. That doesn't seem very fulfilling to me, but maybe that's it. So I would say to that teachers, okay, so identify that couple of kids that say, no, they just nerd out on it. They love it. Okay, so then my goal is, how do I help another 2 or 3 kids see this in the same way? So my goal is to help you feel empowered, and I'm going to work on that. So that's my job. And again, I know I'm not going to get everybody, probably not. There's always going to be some, it doesn't matter what you do. I might have even been that kid. So and that's why even when I asked that to my students about, listen, is this just you're just checking a box here? There were certain situations. I'm teaching adults, like I'm teaching somebody who's a mom who's teaching full time. She's got 3 kids at home. She's going to put in, she's not going to put in a whole lot more than what she has to. And I get that. And I listen, that's part of what you're doing here. Don't worry about it. But what I would say is, especially in a high school situation, if your math 30 course isn't the course that excites you and feels empowered, I want to know that at least there's some course that you take throughout the day that you do feel empowered and you do have that sense of, I'd take this course no matter what. And my fear is, and this goes back to the book, Different Schools for a Different World, and the research bears it out, that there's just a lot of kids who feel they have zero sense of empowerment with any of the classes they take. And I don't think that's right. And I think that's actually something that we could address with some intention and some focus. You should be able to make sure that every kid in your building has at least one teacher, one class where they feel like, this is the one for me. And if
what
they
a great
don't,
check-in too. Just how are you bringing joy to your kids?
Yeah.
What a great check-in question.
Yeah. Listen, I'm going to come today. I know you guys might not be having fun with this, but I'm going to have fun with this. And I think we've all had teachers who we maybe thought they're a little goofy, right? That's probably how a high school kid would describe that teacher, because they're goofy. They come in, they do silly things. But at the end of the day, they love that teacher. That they love the fact that teacher was a little bit goofy, nerded out over some weird thing in science or whatever that thing may have been. And you laughed at it. But deep down, it was like, I at least knew that this teacher cared and was excited about what they wanted to do. And to me, that's another part of this community thing, is creating that infectious kind of attitude. And I've had these conversations a lot lately with school districts and thinking about their principals, because there's definitely a leadership crisis in education. Fewer and fewer teachers want to become principals or district leaders, partly because they look around them and they look at the person that they're working under as a principal or vice principal, and they go, they don't look like they're having any fun. I don't want that job. That looks like a horrible job. And what I find interesting is there are actually a lot of principals who say, no, I actually do love my job, but I'm not sure I'm conveying that message to others because it is hard. And I don't mind the challenges of it. I don't mind the difficulty. Again, when I talk about joy, I'm not talking about laughing and fun all the time. That's not what I mean. There are moments where it's just really hard, but like it, like I'm,
It's the challenge. That's why we got into administration.
yeah,
As one myself, I love what I do. It brings me so much joy. And typically, if I'm having a really bad day, somewhere down the line, I probably made a bad decision that set me up for that. Whether it's an angry parent coming in
Sure.
over something I wasn't transparent about or shared, or I'm dealing with a situation that I wasn't proactive about, there's something I can control and learn from it. I think it's really hard to remove the personal touch from being an administrator.
sure.
And that's why we see a lot of struggling administrators right now. We're so invested in what we do and we got into it because we care so much.
Yeah.
But then all the littles we take to heart, all the little struggles and all of that. I want to jump back though. You made a very interesting point. You brought up that idea, 4 kids in your class, thrilled over the moon to do something. And Dean, you said it yourself. How do I get at least 1 or 2 or 3 other people in the room to find that joy? I would almost pull a lesson from your books. And I would say, not how do I, but how do I get those 4 that are thrilled about it to express that to their peers? Because if we know anything, peer pressure is a driving factor. And if we can get a movement of people saying, this is really cool, this is really fun, man, that could become a trend where all of a sudden people start gravitating to it. And it's amazing. Now, I want to shift a little bit here. And we've unpacked some strategies for getting started and bringing joy and how to face adversity in it. I want to hear the story of what led you to taking the risk you took to go from being a public educator to jumping to the consulting side.
Yeah, there were a few different factors. I would say so jumping from the classroom to a district leadership position, I think the thing that really motivated me to do that was I had a few opportunities as a young teacher to do professional learning for my staff, right? Because I was early adopter with a lot of technologies, and so as technology started becoming something that was pretty new in the late '90s and the early 2000s, I was the one that said, "Hey, everything from like, how do we use this video? How do we do video work in a classroom? How do we do this?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'll happy to." I was playing around with it as a classroom teacher. Then I got some opportunities to had time to learn a lot of the stuff that I could do in a few different positions. And so then to do that at the district level, I would be spending most of my time working with adults. And so I really enjoyed that. Then I did that for 9 years. And as things went, the opportunities to work directly with teachers became less and less. And whether it was because of fewer cost of subs, less emphasis on professional development per se. So I was doing less of it and more design work and broader supporting things. It was still all right, but it wasn't what I wanted. Then the other component of this is our school district went through an amalgamation in Saskatchewan in the late 2000s. Also, there were a lot of schools that came together and lots of restructuring that was happening. And they, at some point, basically disbanded the focus of exclusively educational technology, which is what I was doing. And now I was more broadly providing curricular support, which was fine, but I was still doing the other work because I was the go-to person, right? Whether that was part of my title or not. And I also at the same time was building a pretty decent online presence through my blog and through social media. And so Discovery Education reached out to me and said, "Hey, we think what you're doing is interesting. We'd like you to come help grow our business in Canada." And it was one of those ones where I said, "Well, what do you want me to do?" And they said, "Just do you." So that seems like a fun thing. I'm pretty good at doing me. And so really, I almost wrote my own job description, and it allowed me to work with adults more the way that I had been in my early phase of it, but instead of doing it within one district, I was doing it across North America.
And did you leave your
Yeah,
the
I took a
jumping
leave
point?
of
Yeah.
absence for 2 years actually. So I had that little safety net. If things didn't go well, I could go back to the school division. I tried to get it for a
Right on.
third year just to have it, and they said, "No, that's enough." And I didn't. At that point, I had really no intention of going back to the school district.
Dean, what's so cool about that is your why actually created the opportunity for you, and it made the, again, common theme between anybody I talk about that takes the risk. When your risk is rooted in your why, it's not a risk. It's a
Yeah.
joyful opportunity that you're so excited about. I'm sure in the moment when you were doing it, sure, are there nerves? Yeah. Are you scared? Yeah. That's why you're extending those leaves. But are you loving what you get a chance to do? Probably.
Oh, yeah.
Is it something where you're actually thinking about all the negative sides? No, you're probably really looking forward to what you got to do, and it brought you to where you are now. And your earth about bringing joy, about being creative and innovative and putting the individual over the group and bringing it back to that really is what helped you drive that leap out of public education into that consulting side. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, no, it was definitely like there's always risks for sure. And there was part of me that thought at that time I had 7 more years left before I could start collecting a pension or retire or whatever. And I thought, oh, it might have been nice if this happened 7 years from now, because then I could do both. But it was like, I'm not sure this opportunity is ever going to come by again. Like, now's the time to do this. So
You're only 35 once.
exactly, exactly. It was like, let's go. And no, there's nothing about that I regret in any way. And yeah, I think staying true to yourself, and part of it is all of that time you're continuing to work out your sort of philosophy of education, of what I actually believe about teaching and learning, and making that clear to people. And that was the thing I said, listen, I'm not a salesperson. I don't sell stuff. Like, I know that's when you're working for a corporation, they have a bottom line. And fortunately, I was in a good position, especially for the first few years, where I was just told, listen, if you do good by teachers, we'll figure out the money side of it. So that was a very empowering kind of way to do it. Like, just do right by
Yep,
teachers.
that takes away a barrier.
Oh,
Yep.
man. So I was doing all
Absolutely.
kinds of things. Like, I always said, I don't think I make any money, but I spend a lot. So I was spending a lot of money on putting on events for teachers, doing things for them. I know it in the end, they figured, oh, we'll figure out how to make money off of it. So there's all kinds of stuff happening behind the scenes that for a while, I didn't really fully grasp what was happening with it. But I was just there to build a community. And that was really the core of the work and that's the other thing that was revealing, was how desperate teachers were and are to be part of community. Because as Tyler, teaching can be one of the most isolated professions that happen. And add to that, there were a lot of teachers at that time, and probably still today, who were doing innovative things in their classroom, but their colleagues weren't. So they were a lone ranger in their building. Like, they were trying all these things and they were excited about it, but nobody else was doing it.
And it was shunned for a bit. Yeah. And there was a stage at universities where you were told, don't reinvent the wheel.
Yeah. And so these teachers that were doing all this cool stuff felt like, I guess I'm the only one. And so my job was saying, you aren't the only one. Here's a teacher in New Brunswick that's doing really cool stuff. Here's this teacher, meet this teacher from California. They're doing the same things. And so that was probably the most fulfilling thing that I did, is that I got to, it is today really the thing that I just get the most kick out of, is if I can introduce someone to somebody and say, hey, did you know this person is this person? Like, I have examples of, and this wasn't part of my goal, but I have at least 2 examples of people that I introduced or helped introduce who actually got married. That was
matchmaker. Here we go.
That was never the intent. And I don't know that I'm the sole person, but I felt like I was the person that helped bring these people together. But even beyond that, just the fact that I know there's people that are connected because of me,
that's naturally going to happen in that situation, because you're taking 2 passionate people that are very passionate about the same general topic, and you're saying you guys should know each other and collaborate.
Yeah. And I still do today. I like of the
Boy, did they collaborate, hey?
part, yeah, that's a little, didn't have to go quite that way. But even today, like in my podcast, I find superintendents that you guys should talk to each other because you're actually doing similar work and you could probably learn from each other. So I just feel, man, if I can just do that, feels you're making a difference in some way, just connecting people. Because again, it's a very isolated kind of job, especially as a classroom teacher. But even beyond that, I'm always surprised at, because you're caught up in trying to do the thing at your school. So even you, Tyler, a lot about your school, and you might know a little bit about the schools around you, but there's probably lots of things happening in those places that if you knew, oh wow, how
Can
could
I
I
give
learn
a
from
shout
them?
out to that really quick? Because we did something super powerful just a couple weeks ago where we actually took all of our admin, put us in a room, and gave us 3 hours to write down and share all of these really cool things we were doing. And then we gallery walked and saw it all.
Yeah,
So I actually would say I'm above that a little bit,
nice.
but I hear you. I hear you
I don't
completely
think
that
enough districts
before
do
that.
that. I would say that's not the norm. Yeah, so I think that's great if you're, because there's communities built in a classroom, it's built at a school, it's built at a district level, and it goes beyond that. So I think there's all different levels of community and networks too. That's another. I have a whole thing on the difference between communities and networks and why they're both valuable but slightly different. But I think something that every educator would benefit from.
I could not agree more with that. I want to shift a little bit. We're getting close to a wrap up point here, but I don't want to go there yet because I am learning so much from your experience and your knowledge that you can share with us. What role have you let AI play in sharing your message of joy to classrooms and helping you implement changes where changes need to be implemented?
I think, like everybody, pretty early on, and you got to be careful too when you say AI. AI has been around for years, so this is not as new as people think. What is new is the generative AI and the large language models that we're all using. And so if you're talking about that, first of all, anybody that calls themselves an expert, I don't know if you really are, because it's just when you hear the designers and builders of these tools saying we don't even know how it's working, like they don't even understand it all, then how are we supposed to? So I'll preface it by saying very early in the stages and really trying to figure out what is the way in which I can most optimize its use. It's been very powerful for certain tasks, creating very simple logistical things. Like I needed to get a bunch of information from a whole bunch of different school districts. And so I said, I need the address, I need the contact information of these 10 school districts. And so I just put them in there and it basically put it all in a table. So that was like one of these magic moments. Holy man, this is amazing, because that would have taken me a good hour to do instead of something that took me 5 minutes. But to get to your point, which I think is, I probably would have to start by saying I don't really know how I'm getting there. But that's it. That's it. When it comes to thinking about that, that to me is the most interesting question that we face when it comes to thinking about AI. And that is not how is it going to make us more productive and how is it going to be used as a thought partner? Those are all great uses of the tools. But how's it going to change and amplify? Like, there's two parts. There's the change part, especially when it comes to teaching and learning. So how does this change the way I teach so that I can infuse more joy and make learning come alive in a way that it hasn't? Because I think most of us tend to think we did this with technology 20 years ago, right? Oh, well, we have a word processor now. This will really help us make writing easier, whatever. I don't know that we spend as much time thinking about really the way it might change the way we write, right? I remember reading and thinking a lot about even the use of hyperlinks, right? When we first began hyperlinking, how does that change the way I communicate with you? So I'm not talking now about just faster, cleaner, more efficient. I'm talking about different. How is it different? And again, it may not even be better. I don't know if sometimes we often think that technology, assuming if we use it, it's going to make things better. It might not. But I think that's the question that I'm hoping that with the work that I get to, because right now everybody wants to create a lot of policy, a lot of guidelines whether it's academic integrity, whether it's ways that it can be used ethically, worrying about bias, all these things, which are important things. But the really interesting question is, does this actually change? How could this change learning for the better so that I can spend more time doing the thing that I really want to do with kids, right? Like the being together. And I think that's the fascinating question to explore. I think it's also interesting right now at the same time, all the provinces that are putting legislation together about banning cell phones in the classroom. And that is a complicated issue because I get it. There's no question that cell phones can be a distraction and take away from what I talked about before about this community idea. At the same time, wow, these are pretty powerful devices that when used properly can be really useful.
And they're sometimes faster, better than what we have capable at a
Yeah, than an old laptop or whatever it might be. So
yeah.
it's a complicated question. And these are the things that I don't think in education we give ourselves enough time and space to just dive into the nuances of this because we just want to create a policy and then everybody just do this. Let's wait a minute. Maybe not. And I just think that's where things become interesting.
It's funny you mentioned that because my dissertation for my doctorate is all on policy and decision-making processes. But this is where what I'm doing comes from, because that's my academic side. And what's really important about it is those decisions, those policies, they need to be rooted in our earth. They need to be rooted in our why. And you actually gave a response I was hoping you would give when we brought up generative AI, which is you need a purpose for it, because you can use it as an idea bouncer and a time saver for things. But how are you using it to bring joy, and how are you using it to be creative and innovative along the way? It can do a lot of things for you, sure. But how are we using it as a tool to move forward and grow? And not just, oh, here's another tool for our toolbox that we can add and put to it.
Yeah, so, and I look back at my years with educational technology, and there were moments, and I think there still are, where when technology does give you that wow, give you that moment, if you will. I remember, specifically, the first time I used Google Earth, and you could zoom into places all over. That's pretty true.
Was it just a norm? I have to ask, was it just a norm that everybody, their first search was Area 51? Or was that just me?
I probably just did. Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember.
Maybe I shouldn't say that on a podcast.
I just did my own house to see that. Look, that's my house that's on there. It's like,
oh, that was a second. No.
Yeah. Like those are moments like this is now magic that you can do these things. Listen, still FaceTiming, whether it's my 92-year-old father or my 4-year-old grandson. Those are moments of magic. And you think how powerful is that? We lose sight of that. And so I think those moments are they're happening a little bit with the generative AI in certain situations, but yeah, to what end? I think there can be ways for it. And to be honest with you, I think I'm probably I've been trying to do this already I want to start giving examples of how can AI bring more joy? And I don't want to try to put something together that's disingenuous. I want it to be legitimately powerful. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it all too. So I'm not as far down the road maybe as some folks are, but I think that without that driving question, just to make things go faster, just to make things go some of those things, I just go, that doesn't interest me anymore. They're just that's not as interesting just to make things go a little bit faster. Fast is good, but.
And you know what I would jump to on that is your last point there, right? How can we use it? Again, you brought it back to the developers not even knowing how it works and what it does. Reads what you give it, and it has the power to store that and read and generate off of that. You need to be vulnerable with it. It needs to become a part of your community. And once it learns your community, that's when you can segue from it just being a tool to something of joy and something of power. It's a brain on its own, and you need to teach it. You need to teach it what you stand for. You need to teach it your philosophy. You need to teach it your mindset, and then it can actually give you meaningful conversation. It can give you meaningful thought. Because if you just sit there and say, how would you respond to this email? It's going to give you a generic answer.
Sure.
But if it knows who you are, now it's going to connect with you.
Well,
and that's really powerful.
And I think that's where I would say for sure that human at the center is the driving force of how we approach generative AI. Like this has to be a human thing. And I think you're right that there's ways in which we can make it help us be more like that. But I pause when I think about like how human do I want this thing to be? Like I catch myself yelling at
And
Alexa
that's
when
scary too.
yeah, that is. And I don't think that's what we want it to do. I think we want to be able to manage it. But what you're describing is we have the control to be able to put in the inputs that we want to get the results we want and recognize
Exactly.
it as it is. And it's a super powerful machine that can help us in many ways and ways that we haven't even we don't even understand fully. When this thing starts, and it will, when this thing starts finding cures for diseases, but the thing about that is it's going to find cures from diseases. And at the same time, it's going to create, people are going to use it to create viruses that are going to kill people. Like that, those two
It's going to
things
go both ways.
will
Yeah.
happen. And if you're on the receiving end of curing a disease that or an ailment that you've had, you will think this is amazing, but you also have to have the exact same time, this is deadly and this has severe consequences. And I think that's the other message that, you know, as we work with leaders is that it holding two competing ideas in your head at the same time is very hard. It is not the way we as humans want. Our brains are designed to, that's good, that's bad, that's black, that's white.
We create a bias.
We
Absolutely.
yeah, and we create binary because that's how we survive. It's not easy to hold competing ideas, but unfortunately, the way that Gen AI is moving, we have to. And so we want to help people figure out how to do that. And that's, I go back, even when it comes to the joy thing, that means that I can experience something really bad and still maintain joy, which is, that's not easy to do, right? How do you maintain that when this bad thing is happening? And
Yeah.
I've experienced
We'll
that.
speed up evolution. We'll get there.
Yeah, but
10,000
it
years.
it is something that really does take a lot of work and effort to get to.
It does. So Dean, what's next for you? What does your future look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. And as I think about my last act, if you will, in education, I really do want to continue to just get more and more refined in the things that I love. And one of the things that I want to do, and I don't know how I'm going to do it exactly, but that is to really focus on people in this work that do find joy and really highlighting them as almost outliers, if you will, because everything we hear about education right now is mostly negative, right? Whether it's the job is too hard, whether it's kids have more challenges than before, whether it's we don't have enough resources, and all these things are true. I am not trying to say they aren't true. But what I find interesting is that there are still people within all of that come to work every day excited, that feel like they're doing their job. And I just want to learn more about why is that? And how do I shed light on those people? Because I think there's enough people out here that are trying to solve all these big problems. Like and not that I don't want to solve those problems, but I just think there's smarter people than I am that have been working at it for a lot longer than I have, that still haven't quite. This is a never-ending struggle, how to solve all the problems in education. So there'll be lots of people to do that. But I don't think there's many people out there right now that are really focusing on who's doing well, like who's crushing it out there. And if the answer to that question is no one, I got to keep looking. I don't believe it's no one because I know, and in fact, I know not zero. I know the number might be small, but what is it about those people? There's a great book I read years ago called Positive Deviance, which is what I'm talking about, right? Like, how are people who have access to the same resources figuring it out? What are they doing differently? What have they got going for them that maybe they don't? And that's, yeah, I'm fascinated by that because I think we all started with the hope that we would be that person. We would be the person that's crushing it right to the end. And not very many people get to the end feeling that way. And again, there's lots of people who, for the most part, say, yeah, I like my job, but there's this, and that's probably typical for most people. But occasionally there's people who go, you know what? There's lots of negative things, but that doesn't bother me at all. Like I love working with kids every day. I love being a principal. I love being this role, whatever it is in education. And I want to find out more about those people.
Thank you for sharing. I have 2 questions and a comment, and then we'll wrap it up here. My next question is what is the recipe? I should preface this. I like shadow stalk you on Twitter a little bit. I like to see all the things that you're posting. What's the recipe for the world's best tweet?
Yeah. Yeah. Used to be. I was much more prolific on Twitter 4 or 5 years ago, as probably most people were, and it's become a bit of a cesspool. But back in the day, I always thought the recipe for a good tweet was specific and obscure that you knew only a small number of people would get, but those people that would get it would find it really, oh yeah, you really hit the mark there. There's a tweet that I saved. Oh, I don't even know if I could find it. And he's actually an educator. It's probably long gone there, but he made a remark, something about, I'd made some remark about the band. Oh, I know what it was. The Grey Cup used to have this lovely tradition of getting like just classic rock and roll bands like BTO. And I don't even know. One year they had Trooper. I remember this is back in the 90s. And it was like, now it's like it's all big production. So I would go on there saying something about how come they didn't have Trooper? And this guy wrote, his tweet was, I'm sure they had a gig at the Legion in Etobicoke. And like that delighted me to no end, because the Legion, that is a very Canadian rural place that only certain people would know what that is, and Etobicoke being a small suburb of Toronto. Like, just, I thought the specificity of that tweet, just, yeah, that's a winner right there for me.
It's a pinnacle. I do have to argue with one of your more recent ones, though.
Oh,
The Jets are okay. The Jets are okay. They let me down too. They'll be back.
with that tweet,
You know,
I'll give you a context on that one. I often will type, could be anything, it could be the Jets, something, this team isn't very good. And it comes from a friend of mine whose father would go to Little League baseball games, and sitting in the crowd of all the parents and the pitcher on the mound, he would say, that kid's not very good. So that you knew that somebody's parent heard him say that. So it's a joke with a buddy of mine that we just say, they're not very good.
that's the small meaning that you like, hey, there's your recipe. So, yeah. Although I saw that Bones retired today, so that's a shakeup.
I did see that.
Right.
Yeah.
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 Hey, this is probably my favorite part, and I always end on this, and then we'll come back and we'll do a little bit of the intro stuff here. If you could give any advice, and we've given some, but if you could staple point one piece of your message that you want people to walk away with, what do you want future leaders, future educators to be walking away with after your work's done?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a real power in curiosity, and to really ask questions and genuinely take an interest in others, right? There's nothing more powerful in my mind than a leader who actually, when I say leader, we could be talking about a classroom teacher, we could be talking about a principal, whoever, who's genuinely curious about those that he or she serves. And whether that's just asking a good question, getting to know them, or I don't know, if you can show that person that you're serving that you care about them, that you remember little things, that whole idea of the connections that I have with people. I don't know. I didn't talk about my silly little Deanie awards that I give out every year, but they're just the moment that I share with somebody. And I think that was what I always loved when I was a classroom teacher. And I found out that a kid really liked whatever it was. Didn't matter if it was Spider-Man or Barbies or whatever thing that was. That was my way of noticing and having a connection with them, to be able to ask them about that thing and getting to know more. And that was certainly for my benefit, because the more I got to know people, the better I could serve them. But I think it was also serving a dual purpose of letting them know that I'm really interested in you. And I feel good when somebody asks me a question about my life in the same way I want to ask them a question about, like, how are your kids doing? Or I know you said your son was in taking this test, or how'd that go? Yeah, being curious and really taking time to get to know the people that you serve in a more personal way, I would say.
And when you know the why of others, you know how to lead them through their what and their how.
You've been listening to The Elemental Educator. Our aim is to illuminate optimal educational practices on a global scale. And second, we want to shine a light on the expertise and knowledge that Tyler brings to educational institutions. He's not just a talking head. He's a practicing educator, a school principal, armed with a master's in educational administration, and on the brink of completing his doctorate. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, find us on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Elemental Educator. And to contact us, fire off an email. See what I did there? Fire off. Okay. Send an email to elementaleducator@gmail.com. See you next time on the Elemental Educator.